Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 2nd of October, 2025. So yesterday, Mike Johnson was caught on tape in a conversation with Madeleine Dean, where Rep. Dean said to him, the president is unhinged. He's unwell. And Mike Johnson said, so are other people on your side, too. Now, I will just tell you that this conversation in and of itself was pretty remarkable because I have heard, along with many other folks who have friends in DC, that the GOP is well aware of how crazy and off the rails Trump has been. This is the first time, though, that we've seen the Speaker of the House essentially admit that they all know that the president is off his rocker. Is it going to result in any kind of different action by the GOP? Doubtful, because what they care about is power rather than whether or not we actually have a sane commander-in-chief. But the admission itself is notable. And I will just point out that George Conway, who of course is deep inside the Beltway, pointed out in response to this that there's plenty of people inside the GOP who will freely admit this in private conversations, who will strategize about how to cope with having a madman at the helm. Representative Dean pointed out that internationally, people are laughing at him, that our allies are going elsewhere, that our enemies are thrilled. And all of that is quite obviously the case. In fact, this morning, there is breaking news from an international meeting involving Emmanuel Macron, where other leaders are laughing about Trump's gaffes in his speech before the UN. So we all know what a national security risk he is. The key feature of where we are right now is clearly so does the GOP. And they understand that he's nuts and they are refusing to do anything. Now, this will come as no surprise to anyone who is aware of all the ways in which the GOP leadership has been complicit. But this particular event is notable because if the Speaker of the House of Representatives knows that the president is unfit for office and is refusing to take action to have him removed by impeachment or by advocating for the invocation of the 25th Amendment, that also shows us that the leadership of our government is really not interested for any moral or ethical reason in removing Trump from office. Again, I know this is no surprise to the audience of this broadcast, but at this point, this footage is fairly remarkable for its very clear admission that the Speaker of the House of Representatives knows that the president is unhinged. So with that breaking news, we have a bunch of other things that we have to talk about today. Particularly, the government shutdown continues. And I was asked this morning on our Patreon feed how long I expect it to go on. And I wish I could wave a magic wand and tell you all that it will be over within a certain window of time, but the administration seems to not only not be budging on any of this, but also actually is now seeking to engage in punishing Democrats for what they claim is the shutdown of the government. I am going to repeat what I said here yesterday, which is that the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They could invoke the nuclear option in the Senate to pass a budget by a simple majority, and they are refusing to do that. The shutdown of the federal government lies squarely at the feet of the Republican Party. No one else is to blame. And yet, because Trump sees this as an opportunity, even though, as I also said yesterday, the budget shutdown does not give him any new powers, He sees this as an opportunity to punish Democrats and blue states, and he's apparently taking it. This morning, he said something like he was instructing. You all know I laugh when it's so ridiculous that I'm trying to avoid being angry or crying. This morning, he said that he was going to go through all the Democrat agencies and determine which ones needed to be cut in the immediate term or for the long term. And I just have to point something out. Trump is the head of the executive branch of government. All of the administrative agencies of our government fall under the executive branch. There is no such thing as a Democrat agency. Every single agency of the federal government is currently run by a Republican. So all of this in and of itself is something that demonstrates that he will exploit any crisis to cause harm. The key point here, however, is that the end result of this shutdown and the impact that it is going to have on all of us, including Trump's base, is continuing to drive the approval ratings of Trump and the GOP into a ditch. And I will also just add, as I have said many, many times, the advantage of this government shutdown is that it is resulting in certain features of the Department of Homeland Security not getting paid. That includes a huge percentage of people working on behalf of ICE. So there are some silver linings to this government shutdown. And frankly, I think the efforts by the Democrats to hold Republicans' feet to the fire until they come to the table and do the right thing by the American people on healthcare subsidies, on funding initiatives that further an authoritarian state and that are wildly disfavored by the American people, is the stance that the Democratic Party should be taking. So we're going to have to ride this out together. I will remind you all that one of the things that is on the chopping block when the money runs out is SNAP and other food benefits. So it is very important, if you have a little cash to spare or some extra groceries in your cabinet right now, that you donate those to your local food bank. Because the folks who are relying on SNAP and the folks who are relying on extra funding to feed their children are before too long going to be in a very difficult place. So please keep in mind that the more that you can donate to your local food bank right now, the more good you will be doing for the poorest among us who are about to be suffering even more. Okay, we have to talk a little bit about the reactions of the military to Trump's speech that he gave earlier this week. And I spoke about this at length both on Tuesday and on Wednesday of this week. In that meeting, there was a non-reaction from our senior military leaders in response to the frankly crazy speech that Trump gave. And some of you asked me on our question feed over on Patreon how we were meant to read that. So yesterday I had a conversation with someone who was in senior leadership of the military over the course of several decades. And she told me that in ordinary circumstances, there would be nothing wrong with military officials applauding someone at an event like that who they liked or respected. We saw no applause for President Trump and no applause for Pete Hegseth. And this person told me that she sees that silence, that stoicness through the lens of her many, many years of military experience. And she went on thereafter, by the way, to work for a major military contractor. She sees that as a sign of refusal and resistance among our senior military brass to carry out the agenda that Trump and Hegseth set forth at this meeting. Now, how that will play out in real time is a really good question, because one of the things that she shared with me is that she would expect that some of these lifetime generals and other senior leaders would be considering, after an event like that, how to go back to their enlisted and officer corps and explain to them the importance of upholding their oaths to the Constitution. Explain to them that the ethics and integrity that is imbued in military training still must hold firm, and how they might have to walk a line of reinforcing the importance of upholding the Constitution while simultaneously not trashing the commander-in-chief. She said she felt a lot of sympathy for the military leaders who were going to be in that position. And that's on top of the fact that now with the government shutdown, we are seeing veteran services chopped, which obviously is a very serious concern to military leaders. So that may be an anecdotal interpretation, albeit from someone who has deep experience in the US military, but the refusal to applaud is a good sign. And my expectation here is that we will see how the military responds to this. And I expect it's not going to be a full-throated endorsement of Trump's agenda, or that of Pete Hegseth for that matter, who has less experience than any person in that room by a long shot in anything having to do with military action by the United States military. So that's the good news. That's the good news, I suppose. All right. I mentioned this very briefly yesterday. I want to mention it here again. A couple of nights ago, a raid was carried out on an apartment building in Chicago by ICE, where hundreds of people were rounded up in the middle of the night, removed from the apartment building, and put into the back of U-Haul vans. The more that we learn about this particular raid, the more outrageous it becomes. And it was already outrageous. We know now from neighbors in that building that ICE dragged out children naked, separated from them from their parents, and put them in the back of U-Haul trucks. We know that they took mothers out of their beds and dragged them downstairs and put them again in the back of these U-Haul trucks. They hand-tied with zip ties children to one another as they were dragging them out. And among the people they took were also U.S. citizens. Not that that makes that much of a difference to them, particularly in the face of this brutality. On top of that, we have reports that ICE officers who were on the scene, who were asked by those who were bearing witness, "Where is your humanity?" said, and I am not going to repeat the word that they used, "F them kids." This comes on top of the fact that we have had reports recently of ICE officers taking selfies with crying detainees who were being taken away from their husbands and their families. From just absolute inhumanity to journalists. We had a situation inside Federal Plaza in New York City where ICE threw a journalist to the ground and apparently nearly broke the back of that journalist. We have seen an increasing degree of inhumanity with no consequences among the people who are conducting these raids and arrests. This in and of itself is of very serious concern because it is a sign of dehumanization. And this is on the path to things that I don't like to imagine, right? Because the dehumanization of other people leads eventually to the conclusion that it is fine to mass murder people based on their identity. So this is something that has to be documented. This is one reason why Governor Pritzker has been calling for people to record everything that they see. We need to raise awareness about this. There need to be, again, ongoing protests and direct action for those who are committed to taking those kind of steps. And we also need to make sure that we're not allowing any of this to go by unscathed, meaning that like it is seen, it is shared, the outrage is shared, that people show up to protest, and also that we demand consequences for these actions. All of this is truly horrifying. And this particular raid in Chicago feels to me like it's a new low. The neighbors who were reporting that children were being dragged out naked and separated from their families, again, we all lived through family separation during Trump 1.0. I personally organized a mass mobilization against it. We know what they are capable of behind closed doors, but this is not behind closed doors. This is now being done in public, in front of witnesses, with no concern for accountability or retribution. And that in and of itself shows another sign of our decline. So I very much want to encourage people, particularly if you are in Illinois, to make phone calls to your representatives and your senators to express your outrage about this particular event. And I have shared multiple reports about this on my Blue Sky. You can go find the reporting on this. It is being reported mostly by local Chicago media. So again, Please go look, check it out. You can read the reports of what happened. You can read the witness statements to the press, and then make your phone calls. And also, by the way, I will just remind you all that we already know that local law enforcement has initiated an investigation into what's been happening at the Broadview, Illinois ICE detention facility, where a completely unprovoked tear gas attack was initiated against protesters several nights ago, where they have been firing pepper balls into the faces of journalists, where they have been picking up journalists, and even Kat Abugazala, who's running for office in Illinois, and slammed them to the pavement. That is already under investigation by local law enforcement. And what we need now is additional investigations into this raid by local and state law enforcement in the state of Illinois. I said yesterday, and I will remind everyone, that we have no idea how local law enforcement investigating federal law enforcement is going to play out through the lens of the law. That raises very serious questions from a legal matter under the Constitution, under state law, and under various doctrines that will have to be litigated in court. But at this point, one of the primary things that has not yet been invoked that needs to be invoked is local law enforcement engaging in arrests of officers that are committing assault, of officers that are violating state law. And this is a place where we could actually start seeing some progress if we empower through our support our local officials to actually undertake it. So again, your phone calls really do matter here. The pressure that we can levy really matters here. And what we are seeing in Chicago, as with everything else, is doubtless a test run for what they intend to do everywhere else. They need to see us push back against this. We need our electeds pushing back on it. Pritzker has been tremendous so far, and I know is speaking every day on these issues. We need to support him and what he is seeking to do here, and we need to raise awareness about this particular event. Okay. In other immigration-related news, a class action lawsuit was initiated yesterday in Alabama by a U.S. citizen who was swept up not once but twice in an immigration raid in Alabama of construction sites. This case seeks to challenge, once again, what is now being referred to as Kavanaugh stops, which are these arrests or detentions of people purely based on their skin color or the language they are speaking, racial profiling, in other words. This particular U.S. citizen has brought a class action on behalf of all those who are being targeted who are U.S. citizens in these raids purely based on their appearance or the language they are speaking. However, I will point out that Kavanaugh, the reason why this is being referred to as a Kavanaugh stop, is in the opinion that allowed the military to continue and ICE to continue profiling people based on race and identity in Los Angeles. Kavanaugh said there may be legitimate reasons to stop people on that basis. So what happens when the case is being brought by a U.S. citizen may raise new levels of concern, but do I expect that it's going to end well in front of the Supreme Court? Frankly, not in front of this Supreme Court. So while the class action is an interesting strategy to adopt, of course, it is a civil action, not a criminal action. I have to remind everybody of that. Where this will land is not likely to be, and I will just say this: I'm all in favor of people trying everything to see what sticks. But do I expect this to end well in front of the Supreme Court in this current incarnation? Honestly, no. I still think it's a great effort, but if it gets to the Supreme Court, given what we know already about what Kavanaugh and the regime-based 6 majority is doing, I don't expect that they will uphold a decision that finds, if that's where this case lands, liability against the federal government for sweeping people up on the basis of their racial or ethnic identity. We had a question about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So yesterday, an immigration judge refused to reopen Kilmar Abrego Garcia's immigration case. I have to remind all of our listeners here, though, that immigration judges are very different from federal and state court judges because immigration judges work for ICE. Many people may not realize this, that immigration judges in this country are controlled by the executive branch of government. They are administrative employees. They are not employees or appointees of our judicial branch. So Kilmar Abrego Garcia has other means right now to try to stop his deportation. He may not be able to challenge his immigration status on the basis of seeking asylum because he was already removed to El Salvador, which was his basis for seeking to reopen this. However, this story is not over, and his own attorneys have also filed, and I'm sure will continue to litigate, actions in federal court to prevent his deportation. So that is what is going on there. But again, I have to remind everybody, because yesterday somebody also asked a question, how do we get immigration judges back that have been fired by the administration? The short answer is, like, we actually may not want them back, because these immigration judges have been complicit in kicking people's immigration cases out of court so that they can then be rounded up by ICE in the hallways of courtrooms. They are employed by the Trump administration. So all of this in and of itself is a story that we need to be conscious of. These are not appointed federal judges. They are employees of the Trump regime, and they are carrying out his aims. Okay. In the good news realm of things, if you have not yet seen the footage of what happened yesterday at the University of Washington, I want to encourage you to go find it. So the long and the short of it is that in a classroom, in a psychology-based classroom, a class called The Diversity of Sexuality, a young white man walked in, threw a Nazi salute, started screaming ethnic and racist slurs, and was essentially chased all the way across the University of Washington campus by the entire classroom of 200 students. He was not beaten up, but he was detained until campus security came and arrested him. And if you watch this footage, one of the things that you will notice is that he was completely overwhelmed by the number of students who refused to sit by and let him do that. This is a lesson to all of us. The people who are on the far right are wildly outnumbered. And I know I say this a lot here, and many of you don't see evidence of it in your own communities, but it's the truth. The regime's approval ratings are in the 30s and dropping. On some issues, they're already in the 20s. Every single day, a new poll comes out showing that an even greater supermajority of Americans despise what this regime is doing and what it stands for. So that footage ought to give you a little bit of cheer today if you want to go watch it. I will also just say that at the end of it, there was one kid who tried to grab this kid's hair and was stopped by the other students saying, "Don't do that to him." Our side, again, I talk about this a lot here, can practice nonviolence and still hold these people accountable. And again, the lack of willingness to allow this to go unremedied on a college campus in America does not shock me, but also is something that we should take a huge amount of hope from. And yes, I am certain that as soon as this footage gets to the top of the Trump administration, they are going to threaten the University of Washington. That is probably the next step. But nonetheless, we should be extremely grateful for every example that we have right now of a mass refusal to tolerate Nazism, far-right doctrines, any attempt to persecute others on the basis of their gender identity, their race, their ethnicity, their religion, and on as we know. So you can go watch that. And the tremendous empathy and refusal to allow this to go on is really quite a sight to behold. So that's our good news for today. I did have one other question on the Patreon feed this morning about why the press is not asking hard questions of Trump. And I will just answer that in the way that I've answered it several times over the last few weeks, which is that there is an incredible media bias right now in favor of the ratings that Trump is engendering. And we also have seen quite a number of these mainstream news outlets capitulate to Trump in recent weeks. CBS is now gone, essentially, from the standpoint of independent news. The Washington Post has capitulated repeatedly. Again, we've seen this over and over with mainstream news, so none of it should shock you. Does that mean, however, that independent media isn't filling the gap? No, it absolutely is. And this is one reason why it's really important to support independent commentators, independent journalists. I happen to be one of those, so that you can continue to get truthful, honest, and legitimate news and feedback on what's happening in this country. So I will just mention one other thing, which has not gotten any mainstream news coverage. 18 blue state governors pushed back in an effort yesterday to stop the administration from cutting health care to trans kids. This has gotten no coverage anywhere except in LGBTQ media. And that is also just a sign of where we are. 18 blue state governors coming together to defend trans youth is something that we should expect to engender mainstream news coverage, and yet it did not. And that is because many of these mainstream news outlets are now all in on only reporting the talking points that the administration is giving them. So please keep in mind that the more that you can support independent journalism, the more you are supporting the First Amendment of this country. In that regard, I will just remind you all that you can now become a supporter of this show on Patreon for 20% off annual subscriptions using the code podcast. I want to give another shout out to our followers now on Spotify and iTunes and anywhere else that you're listening to this podcast. And of course, always to our supporters on YouTube, where we've been for a very long time. Thank you all so much for your financial support of this work. It's the thing that allows it to continue and for me to pay my team and also feed my family. So if you are not yet a subscriber and this broadcast is meaningful to you, please consider becoming a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. All right, I will be back here tomorrow at regular time. There will also be a bonus broadcast like we do every week for our Patreon subscribers tomorrow afternoon. And I wish you all, if there's any hope for this, a peaceful Thursday. All right, my friends, I will see you all back here tomorrow. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.